1973, spring. It was a day just 1 month before my due date for giving birth. My FIL went missing in a maritime accident. Despite concerns about the weather, my FIL, who worked as a fisherman, wanting to nourish me as I approached childbirth, defied opposition from those around us and went out fishing. For my first grandchild, I want them to be born healthy. I'll feed them plenty of delicious food, so wait for my return. A few hours after my sturdy FIL energetically set sail, a storm arose, causing the sea to become rough. And since then, my FIL never returned home. From the next day onwards, the rescue team and fellow fishermen mobilized to search for my FIL, but they only found his heavily damaged fishing boat. My MIL fell into deep sorrow and depression. Because we were worried about her, we decided to live together with my MIL in my husband's hometown in Elmwood Town, Iowa. However, what brought relief to my MIL was the birth of our first grandchild 1 month after that tragic event. Seeing the new life, my MIL gradually regained her will to live. But now, 10 years have passed since then, on May 26, 1983. I will never forget what happened at exactly 11:59 a.m. that day. A major earthquake originating off the coast of Iowa struck the Midwest region. After a deep rumbling like the sound of the earth, an unsettling swaying motion began. The shaking grew increasingly stronger, and dishes and books flew off the shelves with great force. I quickly turned off the stove and rushed to my daughter who was sleeping in her room, having caught a cold. "Helen! Hide under the desk quickly!" While shouting, the shaking intensified. I made my daughter crawl under her study desk and crouched down myself, shouting, "Mill! Is there a place for you to hide?" Immediately, my MIL responded, "I'm under the table." "Oh, I'm worried about Brian." My husband Brian worked at a nearby aquarium and had gone to work as usual that day. After a while, when the shaking subsided, I hurriedly began preparing for evacuation. This is a port town. We had never experienced such a big earthquake before, but I had a feeling that if we didn't leave this place immediately, our lives would be in danger. MIL, prepare to evacuate now. Helen, at least change into these clothes for now. You'll worsen your cold if you go outside dressed like that. There are so many things I want to take with us. So many things we need. But at that moment, we didn't have the time to think about such things. While I was tense and in a hurry, my daughter was changing clothes sluggishly. My MIL was also searching for something desperately. "Hurry, both of you! As long as we're alive, we can make it through anything, so hurry!" I hurriedly helped my daughter change her clothes and rushed over to my MIL. "What are you looking for, MIL?" Then, my MIL pulled out a small wooden box from an aluminum container she had taken from the back of the chest of drawers. "I found it! This is something I absolutely cannot afford to lose." My MIL held the wooden box tightly with both hands and quickly ran out of the house. We had to hurry. Contrary to our feelings, our legs didn't move as smoothly due to fear. The three of us held hands tightly, determined not to get separated, and ran with all our might. And it happened just as we reached the evacuation center. "It's a tsunami! The tsunami is coming!" An elderly man who had been observing the sea from a nearby hill shouted in a voice that pierced our ears. At that voice, we held our breath. What we had feared had become a reality. After guiding my MIL and daughter to the evacuation shelter, I rushed up to the hill where the men were. And then, as if the devil's hand was taking away people's lives, black towering waves engulfed the entire town. The market, the shops, and the houses. One after another, they disappeared without a trace. And as I witnessed these black waves, I thought to myself, how terrifying must it have been for my FIL to face the raging sea all alone. This earthquake was later named the Central Pacific Earthquake. It was a powerful magnitude 7.7 earthquake with its epicenter off the coast of Iowa, where I live. The seismic intensity in Iowa was 5, weaker than the major earthquakes that have occurred in recent years. However, at that time, there was a lack of knowledge about tsunamis, and the countermeasures were insufficient. Furthermore, after the earthquake, a tsunami over 10 meters high reached the coast relatively quickly, resulting in the loss of many lives. Because of that, I was also worried about my husband's safety, but 6 hours after the earthquake occurred, our family was able to reunite safely at the evacuation shelter. 2 days after the disaster, a local medical team visited the shelter. The medication my MIL brought with her will run out in a few days. Both my MIL and I lined up to see a doctor to request a prescription. I looked around. Everyone was looking down with gloomy expressions. While I was absent-mindedly observing the surroundings, someone crossed my field of vision. In that moment, I couldn't believe my eyes. "Phil!" In response to my spontaneous exclamation, my MIL widened her eyes. "Huh? Nancy, what did you say?" I followed the person who strongly resembled my FIL with my eyes. "I might have mistaken, but I just saw someone who looked exactly like my FIL." My MIL burst out of the line and started scanning the surroundings. I took her hand and followed the man who resembled my FIL. Excuse me. Sir with the cardboard box over there, hello." I called out to the man walking briskly ahead of us in a loud voice. He tilted his head and turned around. My MIL opened her mouth wide in astonishment. "Are you, James?" The man glanced at our faces for a moment but quickly averted his gaze. The man said, "Excuse me, but I think there might be a mistake." His face strongly resembled my FIL, although he had a slender and less muscular build. "Well, aren't you James Martin?" I asked, mentioning my FIL's name. But the man replied without changing his expression. "I think you have the wrong person." My MIL and I felt something was off about this response. If he was the wrong person, why did he use "I think" and "probably"? I wanted to delve deeper and confirm various things, but the man started to appear restless, conscious of the time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, but I'm in a hurry." "Excuse me," and quickly went somewhere. I guess he was just someone who looked a lot like James, my MIL muttered under her breath. We stood there in a daze, overwhelmed by a profound sense of emptiness. Then, someone approached me and called out, Excuse me. Do you know the man from earlier?" There stood a man in his 50s wearing a black tracksuit and a name tag that read volunteer. I mean, it's not like I know him. But he looked so much like my husband's father, who went missing 10 years ago, so I thought maybe it could be him and called out to him. But it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. As I responded, the volunteer man placed his hand on his chin, deep in thought. Then he said to us, "I see. Actually, there's something concerning him that has been on my mind. Could we talk for a moment? There are a few things I would like to confirm." In response to that, I asked, "Sure, but what exactly would you like to confirm?" With those words, he reminisced slowly, as if recalling the past. About 10 years ago, around the time of the earthquake, a mysterious man was found alone on the coast of Idaho. At that time, the man had no memories of his past and couldn't recall his name, birth date, or place of origin. But there was one thing he remembered. He said his wife's name was Mary. It was the same name as my MIL's. Now he lives under the name John Shipley. Back then, he strongly desired to find someone who knew him, so we invited him to join our volunteer organization 8 years ago. However, no matter where we went, he couldn't find anyone who recognized him. Eventually, he gave up on remembering his past and decided to live his life without looking back. The man found on the coast 10 years ago, his wife's name was Mary, and that face and voice. I couldn't help but think he was my FIL. Could we arrange another meeting with that man? I still can't completely discard the possibility that he is my FIL, I said. Upon hearing this, the volunteer man nodded vigorously. The next day, my MIL and I headed to the designated meeting place. The man who resembled my FIL approached us with a slight nod. "Mr. Shipley, as we discussed yesterday, these ladies might be your family. I understand you may feel uneasy, but how about having a conversation with them?" Upon hearing those words, Shipley glanced at us with an anxious gaze and quickly averted his eyes. My MIL approached him quietly. Do you recognize this? My MIL opened the lid of a small wooden box that she had brought from home. There, inside, was a single hairpin adorned with Vermont silverwork. Mr. Shipley caught a glimpse of it and said, I'm sorry, but I think I'm seeing it for the first time. Besides. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. Even if there was a connection between us, I don't remember anything now. Talking to me in this state will only bring you pain. Please forget about me resembling your husband. With those words, Mr. Shipley turned around and attempted to leave. Watching his small figure walking away, my MIL shed a single tear. It felt like if things continued like this, both my MIL and I would live with regret for the rest of our lives. However, Mr. Shipley had completely abandoned the past and his memories showed no signs of returning. What more could I say to him? Finally, my MIL knelt down on the spot and broke down in tears. MIL, please don't let it get on you. It was the moment when the glimmer of hope we had found after 10 long years vanished in an instant. My MIL approached Mr. Shipley once again as he was leaving. Still believing that he was her husband. I wanted to go see the beautiful scenery together with you one more time. Her voice made Mr. Shipley pause for a moment, but he quickly resumed walking. Father, don't you remember Shelburne Farms? We went there together in the past, right? My MIL desperately tried to trigger some memories, but it was too painful for me to witness. MIL, he is not your husband. Your husband, well, he's not coming back. I crouched down and tightly embraced my MIL, who continued to cry. I told her that her husband had already passed away, and that he was no longer in this world. It was at that moment. Shelburne Farms, the butterfly, the hairpin. Mr. Shipley suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned his head towards us, holding his temple. My MIL, who had been crying, stood up straight and approached Mr. Shipley. I followed, supporting my MIL. Yes, we went on our honeymoon to Shelburne Farms in Vermont. The autumn leaves were so beautiful at that time. Near Shelburne Farms, you bought me this hairpin from a shop. Mr. Shipley furrowed his brow, desperately trying to remember something, and muttered softly. On that day, didn't it rain intermittently? At the shop across from where we bought the hairpin. I think I bought an umbrella. My MIL and I couldn't believe our ears upon hearing those words. Even though there were two of us, the shopkeeper asked if one umbrella would be enough, right? Mr. Shipley, triggered by my MIL's keywords Shelburne Farms and butterfly hairpin, began recounting memories from the past one after another. On the day our son was born, it was a rainy day. You were sitting in the passenger seat of my pickup truck, and you started having contractions. Oh, yes. I remember now. You said that the baby was going to be born before we reached the hospital, so you ended up giving birth in the car. Our son's name was Brian, I think. I felt ashamed of only having a junior high school education, so I wanted our son to grow up to be bright, and that's why I named him that, right? And then, our son's wife. Nancy, wasn't she? Was my first grandchild born safely? Is she doing well now? The Mr. Shipley who had been looking down until a while ago was no longer there. His voice regained its vigor, and his eyes sparkled. My FIL, James Martin, had finally returned to us. Clutching the hairpin tightly in front of her chest, my MIL spoke in a radiant voice, as if a long-standing grudge had finally been released. Oh, ancestors, what a turn of events! My beloved husband has finally come back to me. Now our family is truly complete. To think that such a wonderful day would come in such an unexpected way. My MIL's tears transformed from cold and painful to warm and joyful. My FIL awkwardly embraced my MIL. Mary, I apologize for making you feel so lonely. I will continue to remember more things, so if it's all right with someone like me, could you become my family once again? My MIL nodded enthusiastically with a beaming smile, and the two of them embraced tightly. Several years after the disaster, when the town had finally recovered, my FIL began living with us. DNA testing confirmed that John Shipley was indeed the same person as James Martin. Although my FIL gradually remembered bits and pieces of the past, it was still difficult for him to recall everything. But we were incredibly happy just to have him alive. And 22 years after that disaster, my FIL passed away peacefully at the age of 90, surrounded by his beloved family. The following year, as if following in her husband's footsteps, my MIL also passed away. Now, the two of them rest together in the same grave, peacefully